What did we say we were going to call this?
Fictitious diagnosis.
Hey, I'm Cassie.
And I'm Alice.
And this is Fictitious Diagnosis. Da-na-na-na. I'm going to put it right here. So why don't you explain the concept of this, because this was more your idea first.
We're going to take television or movie or just any type of fictitious characters, and we're going to try and diagnose them according to the DSM-5, which is the official diagnosis manual that every clinician uses when diagnosing mental disorders. And it's just going to be a whole lot of fun, but not real, because we can't diagnose people.
We both have our bachelor's in psychology, so we know some stuff, but we don't have master's or PhD, so don't look at this as gospel. This is just for funsies.
Think of it as like a weird paper that a bachelor's degree
weird
would have
paper,
to do.
Exactly. And if you have any different opinions, you can hit us up.
Tell us in the comments below.
Whoa, you're a YouTuber! So, in light of the fact that we are into the Halloween season, we have decided to start with characters from the world-renowned, I don't know if that's true at all, but the world-renowned American Horror Story.
Seen on FX.
Ooh. We decided to start with season 1, which is a lot of people's favorites, with a lot of people's favorite character, Tate Langdon.
I prepare for the noble war.
Ooh. So Tate Langdon is a ghost in the murder house. We find that out, I think, relatively soon in the series. So no spoilers.
Episodes. No spoilers!
If you haven't seen it, this is very, everyone knows
this is
Tate's a
basic,
ghost.
bitch.
And then he also committed a school shooting before he was a ghost.
Yes.
So the reason, he lives in the house and he haunts the place is because the FBI or the
people killed him.
People who were trying to protect other people killed him. The main plot of him in the story is he's the main antagonist.
Yes.
Antagonist.
Antagonist.
You can tell I wasn't an English major.
That's me.
He tries to hook up with the main girl.
Mm-hmm.
Falls in love with her.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about it. But he also rapes the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great old time.
It's
a doozy.
Tate is an interesting character because he has such a loving personality, but he is a horrible human being. He comes off as this sweet, emotional guy, and he kills people, and he does horrible things to people, and he's an interesting person to look into.
Yeah, you think of him as kind of poetic, and you're like, oh, well, he's just had a rough life, but he's actually committed multiple atrocities even after his death, which is astounding.
What is an interesting fact about him is that he sees a therapist. So we get a little taste of what people in the show think his diagnosis might be, and honestly, we think it's wrong.
So we're also going to each share our own opinion, kind of compare notes.
Yes.
Because we did this separately.
We really did take notes.
And then we're going to talk about other people's opinions and why we think they're right or wrong. And then hopefully come to a diagnosis.
I've written down the criteria for diagnosing personality disorders, which we'll kind of, use to base it on because facts. The criteria for having a diagnosed personality disorder is that it is enduring and it deviates from cultural I can't read my own handwriting. It's an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates from cultural expectation. It is inflexible and pervasive across personal and social situations. It leads to clinically significant distress and impairment in social and occupational and other areas of functioning in your life. It is also stable throughout life. The pattern cannot be better accounted for as a consequence of a different disorder, and it is not due to substance abuse or trauma, but it isn't if you hit your head and then you woke up
it's
and
not
you're
physical trauma.
Yeah, exactly. It can be emotional trauma, but it isn't you hit your head and you wake up like that one guy. What was his name? John something.
Stamos.
John Stamos was hit in the head at a railroad station. A thing went through his head and it changed his personality. Fun fact.
So, first of all, we think that Tate has depression.
Right.
Generally, he doesn't seem happy most of the time, and that's basically the biggest indicator.
Yes.
He also had suicidal tendencies,
Mm-hmm.
big indicator of depression.
Cutting.
And depression is,
Substance abuse.
Self-harm, substance
Yep.
abuse, obsession with death. So most of the things that people with depression have. Great.
So that's a basic one. We didn't want to touch on... I don't want to say depression's basic, by the way. I don't want people to be like, excuse me. It is a very valid and serious illness.
Yeah.
But that is one that I think most people can collectively agree that he has.
It's also one that isn't the primary problem here.
Right.
Which is why we're not going to talk about it as much.
Right. So, in the show, Ben Harmon, his therapist, says he is a psychopath. That's wrong.
Psychopaths tend to lack empathy altogether, and if you could see scenes like where he is really sad that Violet's dead, there would be no reason if he didn't have empathy to care if Violet was dead or not.
Yeah, he would just be like, damn, she dead. Anyway.
He would probably actually appreciate it, because if he had this obsession over a girl and had no empathy for her, that would be better for him, because she would then be trapped with him forever.
I had a thought that characters within the show may potentially diagnose him with schizotypal. The notes for schizotypal that make me think that people might look at him and think that he has it is that you are anxious in social situations and suspicious of others, which he really seems to be. Odd and eccentric, you have a belief in the paranormal or like aliens, like to a point, not just like, you know, a lot of people have that sort of belief, but to a point where it's really weird. You have non-conforming and unusual perceptions, and they can often border on hallucinations, like hearing things, which, you know, he's in a house and there's ghosts, and if people don't know that, they might think that he's hearing things that aren't really there. And cognitive disorganization and avoidance. What do you think about that?
I mean, he does avoid people. When he's talking to Ben, he talks about this dream he had where he's murdering the kids in his school, which seemed very real, so people could take that as kind of like a hallucination.
Yes.
Or similar towards it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I could see that. He seems very anxious. You know, he has his sleeves covering his hands, and he does avoid people other than Violet, really, so...
Yes. So I could see that potentially being what someone in the show, if someone other than Ben Harmon were trying to diagnose him, maybe that's what they would think. But us, being viewers, we see more of Tate, so we know that's probably not true.
Because his visions are reality.
If you
right?
If you ever see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at the dog.
we have an emotional support animal.
Yes. So do you have anything that you wanted to touch on first about what you think?
Okay, I can start. So I have a potential diagnosis of two things.
Me too.
It can be one or the other. I'm not really sure. We only see parts of him. We see what the show wants us to see, so it's difficult for us to succinctly diagnose him.
Oh, good word!
So I diagnosed him with either BPD or antisocial. So the problem that I had with antisocial personality disorder is that it didn't seem to cover the empathy aspect that he does seem to have with Violet. So it basically says they have no empathy whatsoever. In the DSM-5, it includes things like psychopath and sociopath, and he does go against the law. He's very aggressive, so these things do kind of line up for him. However, he does also seem to be very emotional. You see him kind of being erratic, as we touched on before. He goes through these points where he bursts into tears, and he's so emotional, which could be a manipulation that people with antisocial...
And it is sometimes. It definitely is sometimes.
But sometimes there's no one else around for him to be manipulating, so he's actually seems to be emotional. And maybe it's for the other ghosts that aren't presenting themselves, but that seems unlikely, because why would we not know they're there too?
Yes.
Part of the reason... Here, I have, clones.
Ooh!
He says, I want to be a good person, which he is using to manipulate Dr. Harmon.
Yes.
So you can see that as the antisocial personality disorder. And he also says things like, I kill people I like, and I don't feel anything.
So some of the symptoms, I guess, of antisocial personality disorder are
I can read them off.
Words. I have them too, but you have the book.
I do have them.
So the ones that I quickly jotted down are threatening, lying, easily irritated, irresponsible, lack of remorse, and aggression towards animals, especially like in your childhood when you couldn't get it out in other forms. I also saw in my book that it said that these kids are more likely to, when they're having a disagreement with a child, to actually like search for a weapon to go after this child, be it like a rock or scissors or something.
Which we see him do on multiple occasions, right? He didn't just kill the kids in his school. He also killed the gay couple that lived there before the Harmons with, a fireplace poker?
Yes.
Very violent.
There's also, the violating the rights of others and breaking social norms. I mean, he kills people. That breaks social norms quite a lot.
And another problem with diagnosing him with antisocial personality disorder is these traits do have to be there from when they're 15.
Yes.
But they can't be diagnosed till they're 18, and technically Tate never reaches that age. So we can't, even if we were qualified, we wouldn't be able to diagnose him until he was 18.
If the framing looks any different, it's because we just had to stop for a moment to fix the camera, so just so you know.
The last point I wanted to make about antisocial personality disorder is it's a failure to conform to social norms. So you can see these things like his taste in music, his grunge phase, his obsession with Kurt Cobain.
Birds! Weird kid who likes birds! I like birds. But.
And they even talk about how he was kind of like an outsider and a loner, so there's a failure to conform, definitely.
Yes, definitely. So we both agreed on borderline personality disorder as another potential one that he may have. Some quick notes about that. People with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, have a strong fear of abandonment. They become aggressive and even self-mutilating when they feel that someone's going to leave them, in hopes that the person will stay because they are freaked out. They have shifting views of themselves. One moment they may think one thing, and then another moment they might just be completely different. They have very strong emotions, which, hello, Tate Langdon. And they have very low trust in others, and all that jazz. And there is also, fun fact about BPD, there are higher correlations with childhood abuse and trauma for people who have BPD.
They also have impulsivity.
Yes!
Especially for things like, hurting themselves. That's a big one. They're usually suicidal. They also have impulsivity in things like sex, and we know he talks about that.
Oh my god, he's always just like, I love sex, I wish I could have it. And it's like
and intense anger or difficulty control. It's very irrationally angry all of a sudden.
Yes, and he totally is.
You can see this in a lot of his different times when he's dealing with the girl at school that Violet has troubles with.
Oh my god.
Extremely irrationally angry.
Completely goes just off the wall on her. Remember, that one scene, Violet just kind of wants to scare her, and he, attacks her face, and he pretends it isn't him. But
I mean, it's also the baby, but
yeah,
there
are, all these things, he freaks her out, and to a point where she is messed up after this. Yeah. And that is just, Violet just wanted to scare her a little bit, and he goes way too far.
People with BPD are very empathetic.
Yes. Oh.
Empathic.
And you see him going ahead and doing things for people, even though people may think some of his actions are very selfish. A lot of the stuff that he does is because of Miss Montgomery. He wants to give her a baby because she always wanted a baby. So he's like, these gay guys are going to get a baby. Let's just wait and then get the gay guys babies. And then when that doesn't work out, he kills the gay people because he's mad. Sorry. He knocks up Miss Harmon, again, in another effort to get her a baby, because she was nice to him as a child when his mom was awful.
So he thinks of her as the caretaker, and a big part of BPD is trying to get the attention and the compassion of the caretaker.
And that is one of the reasons why we lean away from antisocial personality, because that is a lot of low empathy. You're doing a lot of stuff for yourself. You don't really. It's very similar to psychopathy.
Because it's part of Psychopath.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
They are pretty much interchangeable, antisocial and psychopathology, and a lot of that is, no remorse. You're doing all these things for yourself. You don't understand other people's emotions, and Tate does seem to have an understanding of people's emotions, even if it's skewed. He he's like, oh, she's upset, I don't want her to be upset. And it isn't, I don't want her to be upset because then I'm not in as good as favor. It's, I don't want her to be upset. And that is a big reason why we decided off camera that we lean a little bit more towards borderline.
And there's also he seems very compassionate towards his sister.
Yes.
They talk a lot about how he loved his sister and how she loved him back.
Even though I don't think we even see them together.
We see them in a picture. They have one dinner scene together. And that's
right!
And that's when you also find out that he really cares about his brother, which his mother kills, which is childhood trauma.
Exactly.
Both antisocial personality disorder and borderline personality disorder both have a family history traditionally. Both have generally genetic factors or at least social factors that go into a family setting. So Constance's behavior could indicate that there is a genetic line. We
didn't really look into Constance as much. I could totally see Constance having borderline personality disorder.
Or antisocial. I could see both.
Because, you know, just thinking about the way that she is with Addie, she is awful. But she also does not want to lose Addie at all. She is like, this girl, she's mine, even though I treat her terribly.
Yeah, and when Mrs. Harmon does something that's not even close to what Constance does, she still snaps back at her because it's her child and she's protected of her.
Doesn't she say she's going to rip her arm off?
Yeah, something like that.
Which is pretty irrational, don't you think?
Pretty irrational. He also wants the thoughts to go away. He says this at some point. And I think that's very telling of how he actually, you know, feels like he is trapped in his mind, which a lot of people with BPD do feel like.
Yeah.
At least in my experience with talking to people with BPD.
I think if he was antisocial, he wouldn't really care to get those thoughts out. I don't think that would even really be on his radar. He wouldn't really be like, oh, I shouldn't be acting this way. He would just be like, I love killing people.
Not that all people with antisocial personality disorder kill people.
But that's the way he is. So,
but with his tendencies,
he probably
feel that way.
With his tendencies, he would probably just be like, well, this is what I do. Why don't people like this? Whatever.
So getting into our final diagnosis, because we've told you both sides of how we feel, I wanted to talk about some history of the character. So when they were designing this character, it is very obvious that they were basing it off of the Columbine killers.
Yes.
They're the first mass school shooting killers, right? And there were two of them, and they both had different diagnoses that happened before their death. So one of them, Dylan, was diagnosed with depression, which we already talked about. We can see very evidently in Tate. So that's very clear. Eric was diagnosed as a psychopath, which now falls under antisocial personality disorder, as we talked about. And so I think they were trying to lean that way. But I think that also trying to humanize the character and make him likable, because that's what they wanted to do with the audience, they actually turned him into a different diagnosis, which is the BPD, to show the empathy and to have us connect to the character.
I think the best way, as a writer, the best way to write a villain is to make him have qualities that are somewhat redeemable. I think a villain needs to believe that what they are doing is right. They need to have strong beliefs. They can't just be doing it because they are evil and they're like, well, I'm evil, this is what I do. A good villain believes that what they're doing is right and they have great reasoning for it, which Tate does. I think it's also very interesting to have a villain who is kind of empathetic, who, you know, is sad and cares about people, and I think that really sets villains apart from one another. Like someone, while I love the Joker, he is so fun, he just does what he does because he wants to do it. And a lot of characters are that way, but not done in an interesting fashion. Characters like Tate, who you can tell have feelings, are way more interesting, and I think humanizing him the way that they did really made the show what it was.
So Tate, if you're watching on Violet's laptop on YouTube,
yes,
just know that we're here for you. We'll diagnose you, even if Ben Harmon won't.
Send us messages. We'll help you out, buddy.
And we think you have borderline personality disorder.
So, Ben Harmon, if you're watching this, help the boy out better, boy. Come on. I guess that was it. If you guys liked it, let us know, because we thought this was fun because we're using our degrees. If you liked this, obviously, like the video.
Or you can comment with what you think.
And you can also subscribe.
Or subscribe if you speak English.
We'll see you folks later. Happy Halloween season. It's time for Halloween. Bye!